Formatting and mechanics, sort of how you put the story together on the page, because every screenplay, when you open it up and you start reading it, you have to allow the author to teach you how to read their individual screenplay. So you'll see ... SC on the top of every page in the screenplay. Some people may be questioning what that is. It's something they used to see all the time. It means that the scene from the previous page is continuing. So it'd be ... SC 121. It just means that what you're seeing at the top of the page is the continuation of scene 121. Also, because of that, the page numbers are flipped to the bottom of the page. Most of the time we see the page numbers in the top right. This time, and this one got me a few times, I had to go looking for the page number. Another interesting thing, mechanics here that Fargeat uses is the use of bold text. More than I've seen in a script, maybe ever. It's all over the page. There's almost as much bold text as non-bold text. If we take a look at page 109, you can see the dialogue boxes here with bold text, bolding what the character is saying. But if you look at page 102, she continues to use bold for dialogue, but in this case, the dialogue is not in classic middle of the page dialogue boxes, just put to the side. This happens a lot in the screenplay, and it really sort of messed with me because I was trying to figure out, why is this happening? Why are some of the dialogue in the center of the page in the more traditional way, and then there's all this dialogue that's just crammed to the left of the page here, some of it bold, some of it not. I was thinking, is this a dream? Is this, are we about to have a Fight Club situation at the end of the screenplay? So it was interesting to see the choices here. If you picked up this screenplay now, and a lot of people have since we're in award season, probably the thing that jumps out at you the most is right here. These black text boxes. Look at page 18 here. You see how she highlighted, "You are one," and also, "You can't escape from yourself." Big text with the black highlight. Don't see that every day. Using it here for important information, but if you look on page 145, this is an example of how it's used to introduce a character. Anytime an important character is brought into the story, their name is highlighted in this way. This is the very end of the screenplay, and the last character introduced is Puddle of Monstro Eliza Sue. And so there you go, introducing that character, and then the end in bold highlight. And then on page 17, we see the substance bolded and highlighted in that way. Sort of like what you would see. If you ever did see this in a different screenplay, it would be a title card on end of page 1, maybe middle of page 2. But this is on page 17. This is not a title card. This is an introduction to the substance, like it's a character in the story. She went to this several times. In fact, 22 times in the screenplay, she used this technique. She also uses different size text quite a bit to make a point. Some things are really big, some things are small. Let's take a look at some of those examples. On page 71, we see text actually grow from one size to the other. This is when Elizabeth is, I believe she's vacuuming and she's frustrated. Sue, the person that she's sharing a existence with, is on her show. And so she's upset and the music is growing and growing. But it also shrinks. I really liked this one on page 7. Man, this was really cool. If you see here, it says, "His voice drifts away as the bathroom door slowly closes with the automatic closing system." And then Harvey is talking as he's going away. It's, so hurry up. She actually used text getting smaller to depict that this person's walking away and the volume of their voice is getting smaller. I thought that was really interesting. Another example on 92, this is when Harvey is eating the shrimp and it's just really gross on the page. You can see the text is all over the place. Small, medium, big, trying to make a visual point about what's going on. And one more quick example on page 120, 121. I just wanted to show you how she also uses the large text in dialogue. So even with the traditional dialogue in the middle of the page, she's not afraid to get really big with it. She uses this as a visual medium to try to control the pace and the tempo and the emotion of the story. Another mechanical element to talk about is the use of red text. And I wish I could deliver some mind-blowing explanation of what this is. I tried, trust me, and I can't. It happens 9 times in the screenplay. At first, I thought perhaps it was a riddle because there'd be certain words or phrases that were read. And to me, anyway, it didn't seem like they were significant enough to be a different color from the other words on the page. So I thought it was some sort of riddle. Let's look at this together. First, page 19. This is the first time it shows up. Elizabeth stands. Okay, I thought, well, that's a good one to start with. We're trying to put together some secret message or riddle. Then page 22, waste paper basket. Okay, maybe I could see. Maybe that's something. The next one's on page 32. It says, a beat. And her eyes fall upon the waste paper basket with the newspaper thrown by Elizabeth before. Okay, that doesn't really tie in with the other stuff, but that is a significant piece of text. I can see why that's read. But look below it. The next red one is omit scene 30. So that obviously is not a secret message. That's a scene that was taken out. And just to beat this idea to death, let's look at page 33. And in red, it says establishing shot. Not significant. So maybe it is used for effect, but I think it means really nothing. It may have meant something at one point and things got moved and edited, but there are 9 times in the screenplay where there's red text. There's also blue text one time on page 88, and the blue text is add it. That's it, add it. The only time we see that in the whole screenplay. So same things. Others may say this is stylistic. It's a decision to try to give some information. I don't see it that way. I'd like to ask her and see what she says about it. The same thing with the use of yellow highlights, not the black highlights, but yellow like we would normally see. The only time it happens in the screenplay is once on page 5, and it is the camera stops rolling and the soundstage lights fade. Now, I'll give it to you. That is a significant piece of text, but it is unusual to me that it's the only one in the whole screenplay, and this is a long screenplay. Also in the category of things I don't think were done for creative stylistic purposes, but maybe they were. Page 134, when you look at the scene heading, one of the words is in French. This is the only time that this happens in the whole screenplay. Jour is French. Oh, I hope I said that right. I'm going to sound silly. However you say it, it is French for day. Start off, we open up the screenplay, and the first thing that jumps out at us is this huge 10-line block of text right here on page 1. And Baker is using this to set the scene. He is describing the gentleman's club, and he does it more like pins on a map rather than brush to canvas. Here's what I'm talking about. Look at this. He says, there are 50 girls and 15 guys downstairs and 20 girls and 5 guys upstairs. Throughout the club are 3 security guards, a DJ, the owner's right-hand man, and the music is so loud that everyone is essentially shouting at all times. So he's putting people, casting them in certain spots where they need to be. And there's no actual dialogue boxes for the first 12 scenes of the screenplay. Not until page 3 do we get a dialogue box. Instead, Baker opts for describing what is being said like you would find if you were reading prose. This gives him some freedom to be able to pull some strings and make some adjustments on shooting. It's the only time where this really happens in the screenplay. There are other times where he describes what's being said, what people are saying to each other. But this was very deliberate, and I believe he had a plan. Here's what we're talking about on page 1. It says, Annie sweet talks a businessman, 50s, into getting a dance. So rather than giving her lines to say, it just lets us know that she's going to be talking to him. In the film, she does talk to this guy. She has lines. I don't know if they were given to her or if she ad-libs, but there they are. But I believe all of this was because he had plans for a one of these tracking shots that goes in and out of conversations and picks up everything that's happening. It didn't happen, or at least it didn't happen the way he wanted it to on the page, because look here, there's remnants of this plan in the screenplay. On page 3, it says, we roll without a cut for 10 minutes. So that didn't happen, but that was how he envisioned this scene, at least in the beginning. So we have this prose style of describing dialogue, and then at other times he gets very specific about dialogue, even though it's not actually what shows up in the film most of the time. You have these four characters that go on this journey together, Annie, Garnix, Toros, and Igor, and they argue a lot. They talk over each other a lot. The lines are quick. And we get the spirit of what he means for them to say in the screenplay. It's not exactly what shows up in the film, but it's important to him to have it in the screenplay so that everyone gets an idea of what the conversation is and how it's going to go. He doesn't seem overly concerned about length of the screenplay. This one's 137 pages, 184 scenes. Although it does turn out to be pretty much spot on, the runtime of the film is 139 minutes. He opts for using parentheticals to describe the language that's being spoken when it's outside of English, which would be the Russian or the Armenian. This is a common option that screenwriters will choose to use when there are multiple languages being spoken. Another option is to put in the action line that the following conversation is in Russian. That's at Tatiana's grill when Toros takes the microphone. It says on 91, everything Toros says, he repeats in Russian. But most of the time, 99% of the time in the screenplay, it's like here on 48, where it says, we see here that the Russian in the parenthetical indicating that this is in Russian. And there are 4 montages in this screenplay. And the interesting thing about it is that he does all 4 montages 4 different ways on the page. Let's look at it. Page 28, this is when the friends are partying, that montage to showcase Ivan and Ani's week together. Rather than describe the shot after shot, scene after scene, it just says, we show 7 club interiors and 4 exteriors. So he's just sort of like laying it out there as a game plan. Then on page 37, we have the just married montage. And here he puts the spirit of what he wants for a montage in a single paragraph, but doesn't call for any specific shots. He just says, this is what's going on, and I'll get the shots later. On page 40, 41, this is the newly married montage where they're learning how to be married to each other. This is closer to the more mainstream way of how you would see it, where he names it, he describes it, and he lists it as action points. And if the scene changes, you go ahead and put a scene header in there. And then there's a 4th way. On page 96, this montage is when they're looking for Yvonne. They're going all over the place. This time he includes all the locations in the action line rather than separating them out into scenes. Look at this here. It says the next section plays out as a montage as the crew scours Brighton Beach, Coney Island, Sheephead Bay, looking for Yvonne. The crew hits restaurants and he names them, specific places. Bars, names them, with interesting interactions with staff and regulars as they ask if anyone has seen Yvonne. Toros shows the Insta photo to everyone. No luck. So 4 different ways. So if you're wondering, how do I do a montage in my screenplay? Well, there's a lot of ways you can do it. You could pick this one up and you get 4 examples. First thing that jumps out at you here that's unique are the chapters of the screenplay. They break it down into 4 parts. First is the overture to get you started and kind of get you into the story. Then on page 4, we move to part 1, the enigma of arrival, 1947 to 1952. Then there's that intermission we talked about. And then on 68 is the beginning of part 2, the hardcore of beauty. That's 1953 to 1960. And then that slides us into page 127 with the epilogue at the very end, which takes place in 1980. This makes the screenplay very structured. You know, when you first see that overture in that part 1, okay, this is a screenplay that is very organized, very rigid, much like the architecture that we're talking about here. In fact, you will see a lot of similarities in this screenplay itself, not the story, but the actual document that resembles this brutalist architecture. Here's another example of that. These large dialogue chunks. They are thick, they are weighty, they are heavy, they are philosophical. When you look at it on the page, they sometimes look like foundation of architecture going right into the ground. And it's compensated with these short, punchy action lines. And I believe this is how they save room and don't end up with a 200-page screenplay. They move the story along very quickly, then they let the characters get very deep and philosophical with their lines. Another device they use a lot and quite well are the montages. There are 8 of them in this screenplay, although some of them maybe you wouldn't call a montage if you're sticking to the very strict definition of a montage having to be something that takes us across a long period of time. Some of them are a series of shots to establish things, but they all do move the story forward. The first one is a series of shots showing us life below the ship deck. The next one is entering Philadelphia. This is more of an establishing shot, but it is a lot of shots to show us that this character is moving into this new location. We also have Laszlo working. We have Laszlo preparing Van Buren's study. We have the building an architectural model. We have materials around the world being constructed to be sent to this location. We have looking for Van Buren when he goes missing, and the establishing shots of Venice. So if you're of the mindset that you should not have more than 2 montages in a screenplay, it's worth looking at this one and see if this works for you as another tool in your toolbox. Another choice that they make is using voiceover quite a bit, and that goes hand in hand with what we just talked about. Someone has written a letter, and the other person is reading it in their mind, hearing their voice, while this is happening and giving us information and backstory and catching us up to date of what's happened. We're also seeing things take place. So we're almost getting 2 stories at once. We're getting the linear story of what's happening and also the visual story through the screenplay of what else is going on. And this is important when you're building a story around architecture, a very visual medium. You have Erzbet's letter to say that she's still alive. You have Laszlo to tell her that he changed his address, although he doesn't tell her why. Then you have Laszlo's letter to Erzbet saying that he believes that he can get her to the United States because of the new people that he's met. Then you have Erzbet's letter to Laszlo to say that she found a picture of them. This is all pretty much early in the screenplay, so it happens a lot. But then it tails off. We get one toward the end where Erzbet is writing to Sophia, giving her information about how much Laszlo is decompensated and become obsessed with his work and irritable. And that gives us a lot of information that it would take a long time to get through characterization. Obviously, there are multiple languages in this screenplay. The way they do it is they designate the first time the new language talks with brackets as a parenthetical, and then the actual dialogue itself is in italics. So easy to follow, very different from what we saw on the last episode when we looked at Conclave, a whole different technique. You can watch that video and see how they did it. Another choice they make is the first time the character shows up in the script, not only do they put the name in all caps, but they also put it in bold. Here's an example on page 28. The esteemed and handsome Harrison Lee Van Buren Sr. enters the room. You can see there it's all caps and bolded. This allows them to take it a step further, and every time a name shows up in the screenplay anywhere, it's in all caps. Here's an interesting one to look at on page 92. You have 4 characters in this one small action line. They're all in all caps. And they use very minimal character introductions, even for the main character. On page 2 here, this is when Laszlo is introduced. It says, Laszlo Toth, malnourished with a badly broken nose. He has the face of an immigrant. And that's it. That's all it says about him. They also use bold every time they want to indicate a significant action taking place, like this one on page 40. Laszlo comically vomits on himself where he stands. Right there, all bold. Another example of how this script mimics brutalism is how it uses the sound effects and the music cues. It's in there every time, very rigid, very structured, very raw. It's not worked into an action line. It's not just put in there where you can find it. Here's an example on 63 where you see it says bang, bang, bang. You'll see that in a lot of screenplays, but you don't often see it indicated with sound effects. It's just worked into the action line. And then 18 times they use cue, and this is regarding music. This is how they got the composer together as they were writing the screenplay, and they have the songs laid out from the beginning. Here on 34 as an example, you see it says cue, To Each His Own by Eddie Howard overtakes the soundtrack. And then on 39, it's not a specific music piece, but it says cue, the live music plays in ultra slow motion. So these are things that all screenplays have, but because they're indicated so bluntly with the sound effects and the cue, it's very rigid, very specific, very minimalistic, very brutalistic. They also get very specific about transitions 15 times in the screenplay, and not just fade in and fade black. They've got jump cut, which is a very specific cut that progresses time. You know, we have one person and all of a sudden everything's changed, but they're sort of in the same spot. Hard cut, they used that one once. They used the jump cut twice. I don't know if I said that. Then they do have the fade to black, fade in. 6 times they use that. And then this was the one I really thought was interesting, cross dissolve. 6 times in the screenplay. Another unique element is they have a post-credit instruction on page 130. You can see it here. Really cool. Where they say exactly what they want to see at the end of the credits. They want to see this digital video montage of mid-century architectural masterpieces from all over the world. And it goes into detail about what it's supposed to look like, how they want to do that. That's not something you see every day. There are some unique things here, including the slug lines. The scene headings here contain periods rather than the more traditional dashes, but he's consistent, does it throughout. Also, he opts for the double line before each scene to give a little more space. He doesn't bold or underline the scene headings in any way. He only uses day and night, doesn't use tags like continuous, later, moments later, morning, dawn, dusk, just day, night, which that probably helped him as a director. He does mention moments later a couple times in the screenplay, but he uses it as an action line. You can see where he says here on page 7, moments later, and that moves us forward in the story. Another unique element is that he uses continued at the top of each page. That continues a scene, which is almost every page. He did not do this in Get Out or Nope, so it got me thinking about it, trying to figure out why he did it like this. I'm guessing, and I don't know, this is just a guess, I think it might be to stretch out the page count. This is a very short screenplay, the shortest of the 3. And if you take those continues out, it drops it down to 89 pages. So maybe he had to deliver a 90-page screenplay, maybe he just wanted a 93-page screenplay, or maybe I'm completely wrong. In fact, I may very well be wrong, because the next point I want to make is about the girth of some of his action lines. He often opts for these thick action lines rather than breaking up the beats. Just by doing this alone, he could have added 10 or 20 pages, however many he wanted. Here, I'll show you what I'm talking about. On page 6, you can see this paragraph. It's 8 lines long, but it's 7 different beats. You have Russell playing whack-a-mole. You have Rain heading off, leaving. You have Adelaide watching Russell. You have Adelaide walking down the boardwalk. You have young Freddie lurking under the staircase with the cardboard sign. You have Adelaide staring at the numbers. You have him staring back at her. So all of these could have been different paragraphs because they are, in fact, different beats. He puts them into one big paragraph. In fact, there are a lot of really big paragraphs in his screenplay. You can see here on page 25, this one has 9 lines. And then check this out on page 49, Red's monologue. Red is the doppelganger for Adelaide, the main character. And look at this, 36 lines long, this monologue. This is when she speaks for the first time, finding her voice. The screenplay says it's like she's never spoken before. It's pretty awesome.
A time. There was a girl. And the girl had a shadow.
This is also when we find out for the first time that this is a supernatural story. Up until now, it's been pretty grounded. So, and this is page 49. So he's been holding that tight up until this point. And then check out page 55. This is an example of just the thickness of the words on the page. Not a lot of white space at times. I mean, just look at that. That is a thick, thick page of text. But also at times there's a lot of velocity on the page. Bang, bang, bang. When the action heats up, he starts getting more sparse with his action lines to move us along vertical down the page instead of horizontal across the page, building that adrenaline, building that excitement. So Jordan Peele does what a lot of good screenwriters do. He's got his thumb on the dial and he's turning it down, he's turning it up. He's in control of the story. Jordan Peele uses flashbacks a lot in the screenplay. In fact, 22 flashbacks in the story. So it is not a linear story. He's going back and give us some information as we go. The interesting thing for us, though, as screenwriters, is how he formats those flashbacks. He does it 2 different ways, and there's a reason for it. The first format to dissect happens 12 times on the page, and we can look at this example on 24. Here he indicates the flashback in an action line in the same way that you would indicate a montage. You see here, he says flashback, then we get the scene, and then when it's over, instead of in montage, we get present day. So he uses the action lines. The other way he does it 10 times, and here's an example on page 85, is he puts it in the scene heading. Now, why would he do this 2 different ways? It wasn't an accident. The times that he does it with the scene heading is because he wants to be very clear, because he's jumping through those scenes very quickly, like we talked about a while ago. And as he's going from scene to scene, he wants you to know which one's present day, which one's flashback. And if he's adding those action lines, it could get confusing. Another technical element that he does that I really like, that I also do in my writing, is he gives character names to almost all the characters, even the ones that don't speak. It's a sign of respect for the actors who showed up and worked that day and embodied that person. Here's an example on page 5. It says, they passed a table where 2 teenagers, Mandy and Downey, eat fast food like pigs. And they don't have any lines. They never appear again in the screenplay. And it's not just them. This happens many, many times. Now these 2 actors get to be Mandy and Downey rather than teenagers eating. It means a lot. Jordan Peele is very intentional about the music choices in his film, and so they are directly in here in the screenplay. You've got the Beach Boys, the Nutcracker. I Got 5 on it, which is a great song for the screenplay. We Are the World. Here on H, you can see an example. Even if it's not a specific song, it's still telling you like what it's going to sound like. It says music. A children's choir hums a dark anthem in a strange language. The song is melodic and bright, hopeful, but also unfamiliar and wrong. So it definitely gives you a vibe, definitely makes you feel a sort of way. And that's what the writing is supposed to do. It's supposed to evoke feelings. Some other quick interesting notes about Jordan Peele's writing. In this script, he uses very few italics. It's in there, but not very often. No underlining at all in this script. Sparse use of bold. Again, it's in there, but not a lot. No montages at all in this screenplay. And he does use off as a cue for the actors for what they should be reacting to. But rather than put it in a parenthetical, he puts it in an action line off of whatever it is they're reacting to. And Eisenberg is sparse and a minimalist when it comes to writing. He doesn't write with emotion or bubbly prose. He doesn't write in those short, clippy phrases that are popular in screenplays. He writes in complete sentences that get very to the point. He specializes in character development through dialogue and the psychology of that character, like we just talked about. Because the writing is so lean, he tells us directly what the characters are feeling or what we should be paying attention to in the scene. The rest of it he leaves up to the reader's imagination, or if you've seen the film, he's left it up to himself and the DP to bring it all to life. And you may say, well, he's the director. He doesn't need to put all that on the page. But the truth is, most writer-directors are actually more descriptive because they want to make sure everyone's on the same page and everyone sees their vision before it even gets started. But not Jesse. Let's look at page 79 here. After the concentration camp, they're going back to the hotel, and the action line is, the group walks toward the entrance. That's it. There's another one here. The group enters the lobby. The group gathers around James in the lobby. The group nods. Very basic, to the point. He also has very minimal descriptions of characters, sometimes none. In fact, our 2 main characters have really no description. Look here, right off the jump, page 1, Benji, his character introduction is, this is Benji Kaplan. He has an absent look on his face that borders on melancholy. Nothing about his age, nothing about, the way he looks or, any characteristics. And that's fine, but it is worth pointing out. Also, the other main character, David, here's his introduction. In a Brooklyn Heights neighborhood, David hustles down the street. That's it. That's all it says. And only a couple of times does it ever mention anyone's age. I think the older couple, he mentions maybe that they're in their 60s. And then the translator, I know for sure, toward the end of the movie, the guy who's talking to his dad says that he is 20 years old. But other than that, I think that's it. And only a brief mention in the beginning that they're cousins. It sort of sneaks up on you. We've been with them for several minutes. And if you didn't already know from the premise, you might think that they're friends or estranged brothers. But then it says here on the bottom of page 4, it says, from behind, we see the two cousins walking towards security. That's it. Also, there's very minimal scene description. If you look at page 12 here, this is when they go to the hotel, and he describes the hotel by saying they arrive at an upscale chain hotel. On page 92, we finally get to grandmother's house. This is the pinnacle of the journey, what we've been striving toward the whole screenplay. And he describes the house by saying they approach a little alley that looks like it hasn't changed in 100 years. David points to a little address above the door, 25. It's actually good writing, but very minimal. Page 42, the train station, he describes it this way. The group walks through the train station. On page 38, they're up on top of a hotel looking out over Warsaw at night. Many people would begin to have lots of descriptions about what that looks like. But he does not. He says, the boys are at the edge of the roof, which overlooks Warsaw. It is gorgeous. What jumps out at you when you open up the screenplay is these dialogue columns. He uses two different dialogue columns going down the center of the page. One is the traditional dialogue. The other is for when language is spoken that is not English, for subtitles. It is a common way to do this, not the only way. Here's an example on page 34. One thing it does do is it really fills up the white space. The screenplay feels bulky and hard to digest. It's not, because you don't speak Italian. You're only going to read the one line on the left there. Maybe you do speak Italian. I don't know. I shouldn't assume that. Also, there's these character tags. What's unique about them is that he uses the last names of the characters, but you really have to bear down when you start to read the screenplay, because the characters are referred to in the dialogue by first name most of the time. That's how they talk to each other. And in the action lines by first name. So it can get confusing, but once you're into the flow of it, it's pretty easy to figure it out. There's heavy use of parentheticals in this screenplay. He uses it for all the reasons that you could possibly use a parenthetical. Emotion, clarification, language, of course, what language is being spoken. Also action lines too, quick actions of the characters. We'll look here at page 12, a couple examples on this page. The Archbishop is talking here and he says, apparently so, security was, and then the parenthetical is reading, so they're giving an action to the actor, and then slightly mystified, a reaction. And Lawrence, a little bit later down, it says here, shouting over the racket, so an emotional cue for the actor. Also, he's one of our screenwriters who likes to use off in parentheticals. Some people use it quite a bit. Some people don't use it at all. It shows up quite a few times here. On the same page, we see off the windows. So Lawrence is talking and he says, then they better be quick off the windows. Is this really necessary, Willie? So off the windows, obviously meaning his next line is because of something that happened, off someone's look, someone's expression, an object, in this case, an object. So it shows up quite a bit in this screenplay. Another mechanism that he uses is underlining. He uses it 28 times in the screenplay. When you're reading a screenplay, sometimes that's the most confusing element because it can be used for so many different things. And it takes a while to figure out what in particular that this writer is using it for, to clue you in. And he uses it for two reasons only. One is for important future clues to the screenplay. So if it's something he wants to point out that is advancing the story, but you don't know about it yet, he'll underline it. Or emotional impact. If he really wants to drive home that emotional impact, he'll underline that as well. Let's look at some examples. Here on 28 is an example of one of the 12 times he uses a clue. It's as if there's something about Benitez that Bellini finds obscurely troubling. This is one of the 12 times that he drops a clue and then underlines it. He's given us some information about Benitez and why someone like Bellini might be troubled by it. And then we'll look at the other example on page 91. This is an example of an emotional impact. And it says, Lawrence stares at the words. They feel like encouragement, a command almost from the late Holy Father. So this is when he is snuck into the apartment and he's looking for something and he finds it and he thinks, oh, this may be a sign from God. We see that a lot in this screenplay. These men of God who are looking at life through the lens of, is this information coming from the Holy Spirit? And you want to take that music full and then continue with a montage. I just describe it, what we're doing there. Hopefully it makes sense on the page. But they did this in one line, and I was like, oh, well, that's how you do it. It's on 73, and it says, the music becomes score and takes us through ... and then it goes to the montage. So the music becomes score. That makes sense? So I'm going to steal that, obviously. There's a character in this screenplay, Bob Sings. This is how they distinguish in the screenplay between Bob Dylan saying something and Bob Dylan singing something. On top of that, they also put it in italics, but they really wanted to jump off the page what's going on here. So when you're reading the screenplay, you'll see Bob Sings as a character. There's also a really strong reliance on parentheticals in this screenplay. We see that a lot, but it is used quite frequently in here, not only to clarify story, to character direction, even eliminating action lines altogether with the parentheticals. Let's look at page 5. This is a good example. Pete's talking here. He says, I offered to sing this for the judge today. He didn't want to hear it. Booze. So now they're giving us an action line pretty much of what the crowd is saying. But I'm going to sing it for you. Cheers. Maybe you can sing too. Sings. And that's the parenthetical saying now he's going to sing. And then this is in italics. And it goes on to what he's singing here. And if we take a look at page 20, we see double dot ellipses. Like at the end of Bob Sings, when he finishes the song, instead of a traditional ellipses, which is ... we have ... in the action line there on scene 21, it ends with ... This is used so many times in the screenplay. In fact, 252 times they do the double dot. But 26 times in the screenplay, they do the traditional 3 ellipses. So I couldn't really figure out what that's all about. My best guess is that we have two writers here with two distinct styles, and some of that may be bled through. Maybe it's like a fingerprint of which writer wrote which section. They're very specific with their scene headings. If you look at page 27, for example, it's exterior Bob and Sylvie walk through the village. There's the double dash night. That's a very specific, not traditional scene heading. We see other ones like on page 5 here, they use description to talk about what the night is like. See, it says late, wet afternoon. The other one down at the bottom of the page, New Jersey, wet night. Another example I wanted to show you is on 94. And look at these scene headings. Backstage, on stage, like very quick, very different. Something else that happens a couple of times in this screenplay, which I don't know if I have seen it actually, but it's very rare, is to start a scene with dialogue and no action line. Go straight to the dialogue. We look at page 53, 54. You can see an example of this. The scene heading is, and now at Carnegie Hall ... night. So again, not consistent with the action lines. Look at the one above it. Very different. But anyway, they go straight from the scene heading into the dialogue without the action line. The action line below it, if you look at that one, it's a good one. It says, the Grand Palace of Music, packed, blue bloods and evening gowns mixed with folkies and denim and starry-eyed teens, wrapped. And more traditionally, you would have that as the beginning of the scene and then into Bob Sings. But I believe that when they make this choice in the screenplay a couple of times, it has something to do with they're constantly trying to break up these lyrics. They don't want these huge chunks of lyrics in the screenplay. So they do a little lyric, they do an action line. They do a little lyric, they do an action line. But as I mentioned before, their action lines are sparse. They're to the point, very direct. Excellent action lines, to be quite frank. So they don't want to compromise by just adding words on the page. So they're moving them around a little bit. And if the numbers don't add up and they are going to have to end a scene without an action line or start a scene without an action line, they're not afraid to start the scene without the action line. And talking about that sparse look on the page, I mean, it looks great. Look at page 18. This is a good example of how they break up those dialogue blocks with quick lines of action. Really easy to read, fun to read. You look forward to getting through this page. You don't feel bogged down at all. Good stuff. And just like last week when we dissected Nosferatu, very quick scenes at times where they just go boom, 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 move you through the story. Now, when I did watch Nosferatu, they slowed that down a little bit. So I'll be interested to see when I watch this film if they slow this down as well. But in a matter of one page length on 5253, we're at 5 different places. CBS Records, the Park, Town Hall Theater, the Record Shop, Carnegie Hall. So it's not things that are happening at the same time that are layered on top of each other. It is the story progressing, but it goes boom, boom, boom. There's an index here, and the index lists all of the players, meaning who they are in the story. This is like something you would see on a stage play. Eggers is doing it here, I think, for 2 reasons. One, may have something to do with his background in theater, and 2, most likely for sure, is it's a nod to that 1922 silent film where it also lists the players in this very same way. I love this. I wish everyone would do this. I wish this was the industry standard because it's so useful. If you get lost, you can go back and see who is who. It doesn't slow you down at all as a reader because it's on the first page before you even fade in or write the first word. So it's not getting in the way. If you don't like it, you can just skip it. So I hope to see more of this. I wish I had the courage to put this in my screenplays. So maybe someday I will do it. I really think it's a great idea. Now we're going to go to formatting and mechanics, which is often one of the most interesting things about this breakdown because we get a chance to see how another artist does it, how they write their screenplay, how they tell us how to read their screenplay. And there's some very interesting, unique differences here that we can take a look at. The first is in the screen headings. Eggers decides to use periods, and that is something you don't see every day. Look at page 2, and there's 2 examples here. The first one, exterior manor house, period, topiary gardens, dash, moments later. And to me, it's no big deal at all because he's consistent with it. No matter what you do, as long as you're consistent, you won't confuse the reader. Something else you'll find in this screenplay is that there are thick blocks of text, a lot of text on the page at times. Look at page 34, just how many words, how much ink is on this page. If it was like this the whole time, you would probably be exhausted about halfway through, but it's not. The 7-line paragraph in the middle here, there's probably a dozen of those throughout the screenplays. Thick paragraphs, not the thickest you've ever seen, but still considerably thick. And also, this is a good example of those short sentences. Look at this one in particular. This is describing what's going on between Ellen and Thomas. It says, she covers him with kisses, period. He glows, period. Their love is pure. Boom, boom, boom. So he plays with both long, thick sentences and quick ones. Eggers is definitely a fan of capitalization, capitalizing names, props, verbs, all of it. If there's something that you can sometimes capitalize, he is on it. Trust me. Let's take a look at page 72 here. I would say 95 to 98% of all the names in the screenplay are capitalized, not just the first time you see them, but every time that they show up in the screenplay. I mean, on this page alone, we have Thomas, Ellen, Anne, Clara, Louise, Anne, Ellen. And this is not outside the norm. Every page is like this. There are some names that are not all caps. I couldn't really figure out why, but I'd say probably 3 to 5%. Most of the time, they're always capitalized. Again, it doesn't end there. He also capitalizes props that are used in the screenplay, which is common practice, but usually it's major props and also the first time you see it. For example, if there's a knife that's going to in somebody on page 71, but it shows up on page 11, it's usually capitalized knife to give us an idea. Okay, this is something important, and we also don't want to accidentally forget this when we shoot this scene, because that would be bad. So, all of his props are capitalized a lot, multiple times. It might have something to do with his background as a designer in theater, but it's in there a lot. As is important action verbs, again, something you see frequently, but he does it very liberally throughout the screenplay. And then there are other things. Pretty much anything else he wants to capitalize. Phrases, it's a lot of capitalization. For example, look at page 34. I just highlighted all the capitalized, and when I say capitalized, I mean all caps. All caps words here. I mean sunlight, magical heptagram. Within is the dead body of Orlok. That's an important one. Vampire. Orlok, Thomas, Orlok, Thomas, black wolves, Thomas, Orlok, locket, hair, white. So if you don't like that, if that is something that's hard for you, then you probably won't like reading the screenplay.